Alrighty, let's get going here. Got much to do and time is short, as always. Okay, so try to get through as much as we can here. Racing to get through material now at the end of the course. As always, I mean, I think I was telling my wife, it's like this is probably the one class where I wish there was like a part 2, because I'm like, I've got a whole like extra course worth of material that I could teach, and we'll simply never get to it. Mia.
Like a final exam, is it going to be some of the midterms where we have like all day to start it and then it's just like time?
100%, yeah. So you'll have, I think it's either an hour and a half or 2 hours. I think it's 2 hours that you get for the final. But yeah, it'll be like, I'll open it at midnight. It'll close at 11:59. You can do it any time. In the assigned time, I'll kind of be around here. If someone wants to write in that kind of time frame. If nobody shows up, I'll just leave and go back to my office. And if anyone's looking for me, that's where I'll be. But yeah, same thing. You have the whole day. You don't have to come to class to write it. You can write it from anywhere. Open book. Happy days are here again.
Will we have a class next week to kind of go over the questions?
Yes, that is my plan for Friday. I'm going to use all of the time I have in this class, unlike Intro to Methods, where I plan to use as little of the time I have left as possible. But in this class, we're gonna be down to the wire. Yeah.
And does the final have 6 questions instead of 5?
I believe so, yes. I haven't completely made it yet, and there's a few things I have to switch around because the material this year is a little bit different from last year, so probably, but I will 100% let you know when we get there. Okay.
In terms of like the questions on statistics and graphs, would you like tell us exactly what we should focus on? Because there are like
so many statistics and graphs. Yes, I will give you an idea. I mean, just in general, you can use any of those statistics and graphs to like illustrate points, but the questions will be broadly constructed enough that you don't necessarily have to refer to the statistics specifically, right?
Got it.
Okay. Oh, like I want to say it's 2 hours. And yeah, so like per question, you'll have considerably more time. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to see. I think it is 6 questions if I remember. I have to look at what I did last year. But yeah, you get a lot of extra time to do each one. So it goes from like 12 minutes per question to like 25 or something, right? So a generous amount of time, or 20 or something. I'm bad at math and my brain is spaghetti. Yeah.
So should we be writing more than what we wrote on the
Nope, same amount. You're good. Same. You just get more time. Like just same amount. Please don't write more. No, you can if you need to. Please, no. I have so much to mark. Yeah. No, you don't need to write. Sorry, I have the giggles apparently. Yeah, you don't have to write more. Same format, like, and the questions will be structured the same, and I'm expecting kind of the same level of detail for them. So, yeah, you don't have to do more, even though you have more time. It's just more time, not more detail. The horror. All right. Other questions? I know everybody's like stressing out about the exam now. You're like, I don't care about new content. I just want to know. I just want to know what's on the exam. We good? Okay. All right, so we're talking youth and religion. We ended off on this slide, right? So, just a reminder, right, that moralistic therapeutic deism, right? This is this idea, basically from all this data we have on the millennials. What were the millennials like as teenagers? What were their religious beliefs like? And Smith and Denton, and this will be again repeated by Smith and Snell, in their later book on the same group of people as emerging adults, they said they were basically what they called moralistic therapeutic deists, right? So not really Christian or Catholic or, Muslim or Hindu or Mormon, but their actual belief structure is more, I guess these 5 points, right? Pretty broadly constructed. All right, so we talked about last time and we ended off on the moralistic aspect of moralistic therapeutic deism, right, which is about, being a nice person, right, kind, pleasant, respectful, responsible, working for self-improvement, taking care of your health, doing your best to be successful, and that it's a very broad, inclusive kind of view, right? Most world religions would fit into this sort of, according to young people anyway, would fit into this kind of framework. And that the goal, right, is feeling good about yourself, which brings us to the therapeutic aspect. And sorry, I always forget, I need to fix this. This is actually a quote from the book. Those are quotation marks, if you can't tell. So, what Smith and Denton say is that MTD also is about providing therapeutic benefits to its adherents, right? Now, this, interestingly enough, and other people who've commented on Smith and Denton's work have suggested that this was predicted back in the 1960s by a psychologist named Philip Rieff. So that's Philip, as you would spell it, an R-I-E-F-F, who wrote a book in 1968 called The Triumph of the Therapeutic, wherein Rieff essentially predicted that if religion was going to survive at all in the kind of new post-war world, that it ultimately would have to essentially become therapeutic in its nature, because all of Western society was shifting in its focus to a sort of therapeutic model, right? Where it was very much about making people feel good about themselves. So that religion was also going to have to become about this. So what do Smith and Denton say? Well, moralistic therapeutic deism, they say, is not a religion of repentance from sin, of keeping Sabbath, of living as a servant of a sovereign divine, of steadfastly saying one's prayers, of faithfully observing high holy days, of building character through suffering, of basking in God's love and grace, of spending oneself in gratitude and love for the cause of social justice, etc., etc. It's a religion that is about feeling good about yourself, right? It's about feeling good, happy, secure, and at peace. And so we see this too kind of in later discourses about religion, right? When religion is no longer making people feel good, right? You tend to see, in some senses, a phenomenon like the nuns, right? When it's no longer accomplishing this, it can be jettisoned. The other thing that happens, obviously, and this is not something Smith and Denton talk about because they're being just descriptive here, is it comes into competition with a lot of self-help kind of literature, right? As you move through, more towards the present day, there's this whole kind of pop psychology, self-help literature that springs up, and suddenly religion is in competition with that. I don't know. I feel like it finds its apogee in the book Eat, Pray, Love, which was made into a movie so terrible that every time I think about it, I want to vomit. But that's neither here nor there. I taught a class on, contemporary film and Christian values a few years ago, and we watched Eat, Pray, Love. Mostly it was just me hitting my head against the blackboard repeatedly because it's such a bad movie. Why does it do that? Why? Sometimes. All right. Okay. So it's therapeutic. And last, it is, what Smith and Denton refer to as deistic, right? So it posits a certain kind of God, right? They do have a belief in God. It's not atheistic, right, in its orientation. It's deistic. The God of moralistic therapeutic deism sort of looks like this, right? He exists, or it exists, right? Created the world, defines the general moral order, but it's not a God who is particularly involved in our affairs, right? Especially in the affairs where you wouldn't want God to be involved, right? So, most of the time this God is, so deism in its 19th century, or 18th and 19th century forms, right, was basically this idea that God had made the world, the universe, or whatever, and then essentially sort of disappeared, right? Been like, great, created something cool, out of here. What Smith and Denton are doing is kind of reformulating the idea of deism here. It says, like, this is a God that mostly isn't involved, right? Except when people want him to be, right? So, there's an idea that God is, watching over everything from above, the creator of everything, and is just up there now controlling everything, but not too much. God sometimes gets involved in people's lives, but only when they call upon him, which is usually when they have some trouble or problem or bad feeling, right? So this kind of God is kind of like a therapist, right? It's like when you have a problem, you bring your problem to your therapist, and then God helps you deal with that problem, and then God goes back into their office, except this therapist doesn't charge you a bill. Yeah, please.
Is this just essentially then, you like your own individual God, essentially?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, it would have, like, one of the things, sorry, it's not on this slide, it's on the next slide. It will take sort of the weird outline of already existing religions, because what Smith says is it sort of parasitizes other religions. So essentially like would attach itself onto an existing religious system and then sort of mutate it from the inside, right? So it's not as individualistic in this sense, like you would still be, hey, I'm Catholic. It's just that the God of Catholicism wouldn't be anything recognizable to, say, a medieval Catholic. It would be a fully modern kind of invention. Yeah.
So is this church or is it more being institutionalized?
This would still be mostly kind of churched, right? Because people would still be sort of experiencing this religious system through the existing traditions. Just that the moral and kind of theological vision of these religions would have been sort of transformed by this MTD system. Does that make sense? You good? Okay, perfect. Right. So yeah, deism is revised from its 19th or its 18th century version, by the therapeutic qualifier, right? Because God is there when you need God to be there. Otherwise, not there. Yeah. So I mean, Smith describes God in this system as a mix between a divine genie and a cosmic butler, right? On call at all times to help you out, and otherwise, mostly making themselves scarce and blending into the furniture. And okay, I think this one is an important one that Smith kind of stresses. The God of moralistic therapeutic deism is not demanding, right? So it's not like, say your prayers, live justly, whatever. He actually can't be, since his job is to solve our problems and make people feel good about themselves, right? So, yeah, God cannot be overly demanding because that might make you feel bad. If your sins are pointed out, that might make your self-esteem decline. And so this is not the kind of God that would do that. And then, sorry, who's awesome? You're awesome. This is Buddy Jesus from the film Dogma. Okay. So, what Smith and Denton say is, right, MTD is not a religion that teenagers adopt and practice wholesale or not at all, right? It, like I said a second ago in answer to this question, it's a really, basically, elements of its kind of belief system, its creed, are assimilated, by degrees and parts into more traditional religious faiths, right? So, like I said, it sort of parasitizes them, and that's what they say, right? This religious creed appears to operate as a parasitic faith, right? It obviously, like when you look at the creed of moralistic therapeutic deism, it's very thin, right? It's very thin in its explanatory power. It's very thin in its kind of theological emphasis. And so what Smith and Denton says is it wouldn't be able to survive on its own, but it's basically sort of taken over kind of the religious consciousness of millennials by attaching itself to other religions and basically mutating them into an image of itself. Okay, so he says its adherents must be Christian moralistic therapeutic deists, Jewish moralistic therapeutic deists, Mormon, Muslim, Hindu, or even non-religious moralistic therapeutic deists, right? So like some of our nuns, right, are going to essentially probably be somewhere in the realm of moralistic therapeutic deism. Again, this claim from Smith and Denton is a provocative one, but one that certainly a lot of the Christian commentariat has attached itself to. That a significant part of Christianity in the United States is actually only tenuously connected to the actual historical Christian tradition, but most of it has morphed into, and I love this phrase, Smith can turn a phrase, that's for sure, Christianity's misbegotten step cousin, Christian moralistic therapeutic deism.
Just wondering, for MTD, could it be argued that that is the space where religious innovators could start to brew? If it's like this religion's getting tired, MTD starts to form where it's kind of like plucking from everything, something new happens and then boosts.
I like how you're thinking. Smith doesn't say that. I think Smith ultimately kind of sees MTD as fundamentally a watering down of existing religious systems. And when we talk about Kenda Crusty Dean in 2 slides, she has a kind of alternate explanation. I would think of it more probably as a sort of religious evolution in the style of maybe Parsons and Bella, in their thinking that this is how religion sort of deals with the complex landscape of modernity. I don't think maybe Joel Osteen is the innovator that's kind of running this, but I don't think there's like to my knowledge, there isn't anyone explicitly trying to run churches on this kind of grounds. But I guess like maybe the seeker-sensitive movement in Christianity, maybe those were religious innovators sort of reacting to this creed and integrating it. Yeah, please.
Does this have anything like, would there be some kind of transition between going from like more orthodox religions to more into MTV? Would there be any kind of trails where it's like peel off, like marginal peel off, or is it pretty stable?
I think what you end up seeing if you look at the data and you sort of like put the pieces together is that this MTD will end up leaving people in a pretty marginal space, and that then that's probably your group that's peeling off into the nuns, right? Because it's not a very compelling religious system at the end of the day. It's very moderate, right? It's very kind of low demand, and so it probably doesn't require much out of its adherents, meaning that peel off is going to be really easy. Even like things like regularly attending religious services, right, is not something that like God is not placing demands on you in MTD. You're placing demands on God. And so, yeah, very marginal and very easy to peel off and to go from, well, since there's no demands anyway, why am I even doing this, right? I think that's a reasonable kind of assessment. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. All right. Other questions before I move forward? Okay. So, one of the things that, and I wish I could show you, because like I said, this class could now like literally spiral into an entire other class. Like we could leave it at this point and start a whole different course. I have the material, it's already ready, but we've run out of time. I could pull up the slides right now. We were out of time, sadly. There's so much to say. Anyway, I will talk about that maybe later. So, one of the things that Smith and Denton sort of suggest is that this moral system, right, it's not, because they did, let me rephrase this in this way. In this first wave of national study of youth and religion, what they did was they surveyed and interviewed both teenagers and their parents, right? And what they saw basically was, for the most part, well, we might think of a lot of teenagers and emerging adults as rebelling against their parents' belief. What they actually saw was a lot of continuity, right? So they're sort of, few parents or teenagers at the time they were doing it were ultimately rejecting their parents' belief. They were mostly kind of going along with what they'd been socialized in, and their beliefs were actually really close to what their parents ultimately believed. So what does this mean? Well, it ultimately means that moralistic therapeutic deism is not sort of a new invention of the millennials. The millennials might be sort of a culmination of it, but it ultimately sort of has been forming, probably maybe since the silent generation, it's sort of been transforming these more orthodox creeds into itself. But it is a long way along the process of transforming, say, all of the religions in America into this sort of moralistic therapeutic deism version of themselves, right? And if you look at, and I can tell you because I have, again, this is from Smith and Adamczyk in their book Handing Down the Faith. They talk about the sort of cultural models of religious parenting. And what you see in those cultural models is a lot of MTD, right? A lot of a sense that, religion is instrumental in its value, right? It's a tool for living a happy life. Again, that's the subject of a different course or a different set of lectures, which we don't have time for. But this is being passed down fundamentally by religious parents to their kids. It's not necessarily a straight innovation. Okay, so one of the people who worked on the project specifically as an interviewer, right, so they did interviews in 48 of the 50 US states, so excluding Alaska and Hawaii. Every other state they did interviews in. And so they had a sort of army of people in different places doing, the interviews. One of these people was Kenda Cressy Dean, who is a Presbyterian minister and a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary. Specifically, she's had a focus on youth ministry, a field that I believe she is still engaged in. So she did, she was the New Jersey node of the project because she's at Princeton. So she did a lot of interviews in the kind of New Jersey as a state. Okay, now with this, right, she gets access to all of the project data and she got to publish off of the project data. So she wrote this book called Almost Christian: What the Lives of Our Teenagers is Telling the American Church. And I mean, it's a little bit dated now. It was published, I think, in 2012, so it's about 10 years old. It feels a little bit out of date in some ways, but there's some really interesting kind of insights, specifically on moralistic therapeutic deism. And what she suggests is that moralistic therapeutic deism is actually kind of important to the survival of religion in a late modern society, right? So if you wanted to see, potentially, hang on, I'm going to highlight stuff. It's fun. There we go. It serves an adaptive purpose, right? It is adapting religion into contemporary American society, right? And she says, one person told me that MTD is the way the church survives in American society by equipping people to be happy enough. Okay, so how does it do this? And why is it important? Basically, it instrumentalizes religion, right? It turns it into a tool in a toolbox, right? And the toolbox that it's creating or the toolbox it's part of, rather, is the therapeutic one, right? The one about how do you live a good life? You live a good life by being happy, right? By being productive, by getting along with other people. That's the toolbox it comes out of. And ultimately, God becomes just a tool in this toolbox. Something that you use when you need it, right? Kind of like a hammer. When you have a nail, you grab that hammer. And when you don't need it, you put it back in the toolbox and you don't worry about it, right? It empowers people to do good and feel good. And this, Dean suggests is kind of paramount in some ways in a pluralistic consumer culture, especially in one, and maybe you'll remember a little bit Thomas Luckman's, assertion, that, and I mean Peter Berger's as well, that in late modernity or in modernity, religion is now in competition with a lot of other discourses, a lot of other tool sets, right? I kind of flagged self-help literature and psychology and therapy as particular tool sets, right, that teach us, things about even science in some ways, right? How to live well, what right and wrong is, how to be happy. Maybe Christianity's in competition or religion's in competition with big pharma, right? It's like you could take this pill or you could find God or you could do both, right? But ultimately, because we live in a consumer culture where people are essentially shopping around for different options in the get me happy market, it has to be sort of competitive in this way. And Dean thinks that MTD allows Christianity to turn into this kind of tool for this bigger purpose. Jessica, I saw your hand half go up, like you weren't sure. Okay.
I was going to ask, is this why we see a lot of emphasis now on prosperity preachers and then the individual, for example, in Christians, it was Jesus fixed my entire life and kind of just paved the road for me? Is that why that rhetoric is kind of becoming more appealing online?
Yes. I think that's probably right. Because I don't know, like, pick up your cross and follow me is maybe a less appealing message in a therapeutic culture, or as the world has hated me, it shall also hate you. Less appealing somewhat than, those are both the words of Jesus, but less appealing than, hey, God is here to make you happy. All you must do is ask, right? Or like, hey, fucking Joel Osteen. It's like, donate to my church and God will, reward you 5 times over, right? That's like kind of like health and wealth kind of prosperity gospel you're talking about. Yeah, Jessica.
With the idea of being like happy enough, because I know like under more consumer culture, we're trying to like have one definition of happy.
Right.
So is religion also trying to capitalize on the one definition of happy? Because like,
I think it attaches itself very much in most ways to that cultural definition of happiness. Now, there are some ways in which, and I think where maybe it's too awkward to fit at times, religion struggles to kind of fit this cultural definition of happiness, right? Because there is a lot of, say, you do you, even to the point of like, oh, you don't like you're not in love with your spouse anymore. Well, divorce time, right? Because what's really important is not your commitment to that person. It's your internal happiness state, which is very much where kind of consumeristic Western culture is. Religion has a much harder time with that, right? Obviously, because marriage is raised to sort of like a sacred value, right? So to a point, but then there's also like kind of hard boundaries it hits up against where, you can only twist religion, a religion so far until it no longer is kind of coherent, I would say. Maya.
Do you think it also hits like the instant gratification of the market right now, whereas like past religions is like you gotta wait, like
you're talking rational choice theory here,
yeah,
right?
You're
Like
gonna suffer here.
that compensator is going to take a while.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
where we are now in such a society, especially like with so much online marketing and social media, that we get that instant gratification all the time, and religion has traditionally not been that, and so it kind of has to fit a role in society where it has more.
I think you're onto something there as well, right? Yeah, I mean, it's instant gratification, right? I want something. Oh, it's on Amazon. I feel bad. Let me watch, something to make me feel better. You do have that kind of on-demand culture, which makes it really challenging. Now, this is, as maybe truer of Gen Z than it was for this particular group, because, you're talking around 2005, still pretty instant gratification. And Jean Twenge talks about, the millennials as the narcissist generation. She wrote a book called The Narcissism Epidemic about millennials, because she's mean. Damn Gen Xers, always cutting down millennials. But yeah, I think it's that instant gratification culture that's been growing really since the boomers. So yeah.
I have to add to what you were saying, because if you're having like religion to be for morals, because that's like it was to like be a good Christian, but if you're kind of like not talking about sin more, about like doing it only making you feel good, then how does it like teach you to be a good person if it's just telling you that like everything you do is okay and just like
You're fine, I'm fine, we're all fine.
about yourself?
Well, and again, this is where I think, like, even going back to Jessica's question and kind of you're bumping up against the sort of awkwardness where these religious systems were made in a sort of different way, right? They don't neatly fit into consumer culture. MTD is trying to sort of make them fit, but it's always, I think, and where maybe the growth of the nuns comes in, always going to be a little bit less appealing than, whatever self-help sort of like movement is going on at a particular moment, right? Like whoever the guru is of, whether it's the like, minimalist, minimize your home and possessions, or a Jordan Peterson, clean your room kind of, that's my Jordan Peterson. It's pretty bad. Religion is going to very awkwardly kind of have trouble with that, because it's like, actually, Yeah. So what is maybe Christianity and Judaism and probably Islam's deep down message is you suck, right? Without, God loves you, but you suck. And that is going to be a very awkward fit in a therapeutic culture that's like, you suck, you beautiful snowflake, right? It doesn't really work together. I don't know if that answers your question, but okay. Oh, that's going to be the title of my book. You suck, you beautiful snowflake. That's what I'm going to call it. I don't know what book I don't know what it's going to be about. I'm just going to write that book someday. All right. Oh, all right. So this is going to be I'm going to try to do this quick. There's a lot of graphs here. Don't get too hung up on it. I'm going to try to go through this really fast without like flagging every single thing like I sometimes do. Okay, so I'll go back one slide. All right, one of the things that Smith and Denton and then later Smith and Snell talk about with relation to the National Study of Youth and Religion data is they want to know, does it make a difference, right? Does it make a difference for the life outcomes of young people, how well they're doing in life, whether they are religious or not? Okay, so, because people sometimes ask me about this, they do multivariate regression, and they control for 7 demographic factors: gender, age. That's not my pen. Back to the pen. There we go. Yeah, gender, age, race, region of residence, parental marital status, parental education, and family income to try and kind of balance out the data. So they're controlling for things so that, say, the fact that their sample is a little bit skewed female doesn't change the data, and it's a bit skewed middle class as well. Okay. So, yeah, basically, they come to this kind of conclusion from the qualitative data that they have on young people, that the majority of the young people they interviewed, said they thought religion was a good thing, right? That's overall positive. Now, the one thing they had difficulty explaining was how faith is consequential or influential in their lives, right? Even those that were religious had a hard time saying like how faith ultimately affects them. They said that it seemed to make teens feel good about themselves or maybe behave better, but, and I think I'll put a big star next to this one, for most teenagers, they felt that their non-religious peers can be just as good and happy as believers. And many, had difficulty imagining how their own lives would be different, how their own behaviors would be different if they weren't religious. So Smith and Denton asks, do teenagers really know the truth about their own lives? Hint, they don't. Okay. So, question, are religious youth any different from other youth, right? Is faith actually consequential in their lives? Because if it's not, right, then why bother? All right, and this is my emphasis, the bold there, but this quote from Smith and Denton, although many teenagers cannot see it, according to the findings of the National Study of Youth and Religion, the difference between more religious and less religious teens in the United States are actually significant and consistent across every outcome measured. Sometimes it's small, but it's different in some ways. So they measure a whole bunch of things, right? Risk behavior, quality of family and adult relationships, moral reasoning, behavior, community participation, media consumption, sexual activity, and emotional well-being. So a lot. All right. They split their young people into 4 categories. I will not read all of what's within the categories, but we have our devoted, which are the 8% of the most religious American teens, right? A very small percentage, right? And you can see, right, they attend religious services a lot. It's very important in their lives. They feel very close to God, pray a few times a week, read scripture at least once or twice a month. The regulars, right? So regular attenders, they're at religious services 2 to 3 times a month. It's very important to not important in their lives, and they have variance on the other practices. Your sporadics, right? So less religious than the other 2, a few times a year attendance, and then the disengaged, never attend religious or attend many times a year, but identify as non-religious, and faith is just not that important to them, right? So 63% of the youth that were in the sample fit neatly into these categories. 37 were in other or mixed categories. So it's not, there's a bit of play in the data here. All right. So what does this look like? Okay. These are risk behaviors, right? So things that potentially, lead young people down a bad path. All right, so on average, right, a percentage of young people who smoke cigarettes at least once a day, right, the devoted is 1, and it goes up from there, right, to the disengaged 14%. So those who are disengaged more likely to smoke. Drink alcohol weekly or more. Oopsie, none of the devoted actually do that. The number was 0 versus 11% for the disengaged, right? Never, a much greater percentage. 88% of the devoted never drink versus 49%. And obviously the numbers, basically go down in that direction. So, gotten drunk every few weeks or more, 1% versus 10, right? And again, these are teenagers and very young emerging adults in this sample. Marijuana use, same thing, right? Regularly is none versus 8%. Never, 93% of the devoted have never tried marijuana versus only 63% for the disengaged, right? And all across the line, again, I could go down, and you can read these later. They're all in the slides. I want to go through every single one of them. This is an interesting one. Parents report teen very or fairly rebellious. Not surprisingly, I think. The devoted are the least rebellious children in the world, versus 17% and 13% for those other two categories, right? So if you wanted a non-rebellious child, definitely devoted is the way to go. Not that you can actually choose what your kids do. Parents reported the team has a bad temper. All right, so even 32% of the devoted have a bad temper, but it's still less than all the other categories. All right. Risk behaviors. All right, sexual activity. And here, sort of the assumption from, both psychology and sociology is that sexual activity, the later it happens, it tends to be better, from an emotional point of view. The older a person is, the first, to a kind of limit, the older a person is, when they initiate kind of sexual activity in their lives, the more prepared they are for it, and the less likely it is to sort of, leave them with trauma or emotional damage. Happy numbers like late teens, early 20s seems to be kind of good. Definitely when you see 13 to 15-year-olds becoming sexually active, that's a big warning sign. Okay, so obviously our devoted believe marriage is important, and that is a big shift, right? The disengaged, only 24% say that they think you should wait for marriage to have sex. That's not surprising in the slightest, right? Again, believe that it's okay for teens to have sex if they're emotionally ready for sex. 3 versus 56%, and even the regulars and the sporadics, big shift. I said I wouldn't go through all of these numbers, and I'm lying to you. Terrible person, right? All right, you see kind of the profile of these kind of, their behaviors around sex. Much more kind of conservative here, right? And you're looking at generally, for example, for those who have had sex, right? Even in the devoted, the number of total sexual partners is much lower. All of these things are lower, right? Again, the general kind of consensus is the more you kind of delay it, the healthier it is for the person, but generally much less likely to be initiating sex, and therefore, STIs and teen pregnancies are much less likely.
Was it factored in for the potentiality that the kids were lying?
You always have to kind of worry about social desirability bias, for sure. There is really no way to control for it, right? And it's the same. So I will tell you a very brief anecdote. Recently, someone was trying to test kind of numbers around weekly service attendance, right? And in a move of what I will call questionable research ethics, a researcher bought a giant tranche of cell phone tracking data and concluded that basically Americans were lying, right? That 27% say they are weekly attenders based on the analysis of, cell phone data and movement on Sunday mornings. Essentially, this researcher concluded that only somewhere between 3 and 5% of Americans are weekly attenders, for a fairly big disparity. But you never know. Social desirability bias does make it kind of difficult. But even the numbers across the board may be kind of reduced, right? Even people who are in these categories might think that their behaviors are probably not good and report at lower rates. But unfortunately, in statistical research, there's really no way to account for social desirability bias because you don't know how much of it, like you can't just inflate everything by 5% because you don't know if, it should be 5% higher. It's an interesting point. But it's true in a lot of, spheres, right? Yeah, this the challenge of statistical research is what does Dr. House say? Everybody lies, and the truth begins in lies. Okay. Body image. Okay, so body image. This was one actually in another class I taught that people found very surprising. Feelings about body, people being very happy. Over half of the devoted said they're very happy, versus 29% of the disengaged, right? And obviously that number drops. And then, a very unhappy 1% versus 7. Sad, depression, it's not a huge number, but it's, considerably higher, and the never depressed at 23. Maybe some social desirability bias there as well. Feels alone or misunderstood, 52 versus 32. And again, all the way down the line, right, you see generally better outcomes for self-worth and body image amongst the most devoted. Again, I said I wouldn't flag everything, and so I won't. Some very slightly important things here. More comfortable talking with adults other than parents, right? Number of adults they can turn to. All right, this is a big number, 8.4. And I mean, just look at it, how much it is over average, right? This is going to suggest deeper network ties, right? That they have more social capital than the average American teenager, and considerably more than those that are in these categories, right? Which makes sense. They're embedded in communities. Number of supportive adults, 7.3. So number of supportive adults teens parents know well enough to talk to, right? 7.3 versus 3.4. And again, these numbers way higher than the average. And then, just slightly important, average afternoons a week spent without adult supervision, lower, not considerably, but still lower by 0.8. And number of evenings spent alone, again, lower. And again, generally, one of the things that we know from sociological data on youth is the more time they spend unsupervised, the more likely they are to engage in risk behaviors, right? Across the board, drug use, smoking, early sexual activity, all of these things happen more when they're unsupervised. Okay, more reasoning and honesty behaviors. I will just flag, you can look at all of these. They are interesting, but I just want to flag, a couple. Believes that morals are relative, 22% of the devoted versus 61% of the disengaged. And if unsure about if it was right or wrong in a situation, would choose to do whatever helps them, 1% versus 16. If unsure what to do in a particular situation, would you do what makes you happy, 6% versus 40. This suggests, that between the devoted and the disengaged, right, they have different moral systems. And I mean, because Jessica asked so many good questions, I already kind of talked about this, right? These tend to be people who are schooled in virtue ethics, even if they don't know it. And these are moral consequentialists, right? The morality of a particular act depends on its consequences and its effects, right? Rather than some kind of pre-existing, either deontological, like duty-based ethics, like there's a rule set by God or my parents that I have to follow, and that's why I do the right thing, or virtue ethics, right? That we need to cultivate, certain character traits to be a good person. Is that telling me your class is done? No, I got 5 minutes. 5 more minutes. Right, the social justice scores. Oh, Mia.
Could you just repeat that? The devoted were taught the virtue ethics and the disengaged were taught what?
Moral consequentialism. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, across the board, right, for social justice kind of scores, the devoted scored the highest, the disengaged scored the lowest. And again, you can, because I'm going fast, you can read these yourselves. And they tended to do more social justice-y type things, right? They organized activities that are involved in social justice. They gave more money, right? More than $20 out of their own pocket. Volunteered more, considerably more in this case, right? So they're both more concerned about social justice, and they do more social justice actions, which I know is maybe a little bit counterintuitive. Okay, so for Smith and Denton, the question becomes why? Why, if we see pretty clearly in the data that young people who are the most religiously devoted are seeing better life outcomes, right? They get along with their parents better, they're making better choices, they're not using drugs or alcohol or cigarettes as much, right? They have more caring adults that are networking. Why don't they see this? Okay, this, I guess you were teenagers much more recently than I was. They lack perspective on their own lives. I have a 13-year-old, almost 14-year-old daughter. She lacks perspective on her own life. I can attest to this. Okay, so they lack perspective on their own lives. And one of the things, and this is where sociology is such a useful kind of discipline, it's hard to get a comparative viewpoint from your own individualized position, right? It's almost impossible, actually, to see the world as it is when you're locked into your own perspective. What, especially this big quantitative sociology can do is exit us out of that perspective and let us see, the world in a more objective way. And this one, I think is really important. Most American teenagers believe that they're not directly influenced by anything at all, religious or otherwise, right? We've so ingrained a sort of individuality and a sense of kind of voluntarism, right? That you choose your own identity independent of all other kind of competing influences, right? That this is deeply ingrained in our teenagers, so they don't think religion affects them, right? They think everything is of their own will. They haven't taken enough sociology classes, I guess. Okay, so the other thing, this is, I think, important too. Smith and Denton sort of will suggest that there's also another possibility, is that those who end up being devoted may be of a personality type that is naturally more risk averse, right? That religion actually maybe appeals more to those who are risk averse than those who are risk tolerant, which, this has been a potential explanation, though I think it's kind of falling apart now, given the shifts we've seen in the data. This has been proposed as a reason that women are more likely to be religious than men. On the whole, if you look at kind of general kind of psychological profiles, women are more risk averse than men are. That's why there's a whole subreddit called "Why Men Die Young," of basically videos of men doing incredibly stupid things that will eventually cost them their lives. Like trying to jump over a branch off of their bicycle seat, right, and ramming face first into the branch because they didn't quite make it. It's well worth it if you want to have a quick laugh. So that risk aversion, could explain, like, if more risk averse people are more likely to be religiously devoted, right, then just naturally they're going to take less risks, and it might not have anything to do with religion. This would be what you call a reverse selection bias, right? All of the most risk-tolerant people are selecting out of religion, leaving in religion only those people who are most risk-averse. God, I'm out of time. I did that as much as I could. All right. We'll keep going on Monday. I think we're going to make it. Probably, maybe not. We'll see. I'm going to try to pack as much content in here as humanly possible. I'm sure you're all thrilled. All right, we'll start with this slide on Monday. Where are we at? I'm like halfway through this. I should be able to do it on Monday.
So is it going to be like whatever we can cover until Wednesday, or in terms of the content?
Probably. Or Friday morning.
Okay.
First 10 minutes of Friday, maybe we'll pack in just a tiny bit more. Yeah, I'll try to finish up by Wednesday so that it gives you...
We can use Friday for review and Q&A.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Have a good week.
Cheers. You as well.